Our next speaker is here to talk about the art of making choices. Wow, that's such an interesting discussion to have. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Sheena Iyengar. She's a visually impaired Indian-American professor at the Columbia Business School. During her PhD in social psychology at Stanford University, Iyengar became interested in how people make choices. Particularly, she lays her interest in understanding the importance and the universality of choice in people's life. Her dissertation entitled Choice and Its Discontents received the prestigious Best Dissertation Award for 1998 from the Society of Experimental Social Psychology. Her principal line of research concerns the psychology of choice, and she has been studying how people perceive and respond to choice since the 1990s. So, ladies and gentlemen, to understand the choices that the millennials make, please welcome on stage Ms. Iyengar.
Good morning, everybody. That is so lame. You need to do better than that. Good morning, everybody. Oh, perfect. Much better. Come on, we all have to get over jet lag. All right, so I think I lost track of the number of times she said the word choice after about 5. So I figured I would add to this choice explosion by starting off the session by asking you a really easy question. How many choices do you think you make in a typical week in your life? Now, I'm blind, so don't put your fingers up at me. Just call out some numbers at me. How many choices do you think you make in a typical week? Okay, so I'm hearing 100s, 500s, 1,000s. Anything higher? 10,000, okay? I think I might have heard infinity somewhere in the midst of the crowd. But suffice it to say, we have quite a few choices in our everyday lives. In fact, in the last 30 years, if there's one thing that has truly been explosive, no matter where you go in the globe, is the explosion of choice. It's no longer the case that we can choose our careers, our spouses, where we want to live, how we want to schedule our entertainment, but we have so many choices. You know, the average grocery store in the United States in the 1970s had 9,000 products in it. Today, the average grocery store in the United States has over 40,000 products. The typical Walmart in the United States has about 120,000 products, but if you were to count up all the products across all the Walmarts in the United States, it amounts to about 46 million. Amazon offers upwards of 480 million products and counting. If you go to a Starbucks, 87,000 drink combinations. Now, let's be real here. We're not just talking the United States. I mean, in India, do you know they have at least 439 soap operas and the same number of different kinds of aromatic soaps? And don't forget that there's some multiplier of all of that in terms of the number of spices and spice combinations they have. So choice is not exactly a foreign thing, no matter where you go in the globe. And we're not just talking about your brick and mortar choices about what we're going to wear, what we're going to eat, what book we're going to read. In today's world, we have choices that we never imagined not too long ago. Take, for example, the decision of how to find your mate, you know, who you're going to marry and have kids with. Well, gone are the days when you had the traditional arranged marriage or the traditional courtship, shall we say, a love courtship. Today, everybody just goes on some version of Match.com. And did you know that there are 8,000 online dating sites across the globe? Tinder alone has 1 billion swipes a day, and in India we have at least one of them known as Badoo, but they have a lot more. So you can find your soulmate now wherever you go. And you can be really specific about your soulmate, right? You could only pick amongst people that went to Ivy League colleges or farmers only or cat lovers only. You name your pick. And not too long from now, our children and our grandchildren are going to be sitting with genetic consultants and deciding the complete design quality of our still to be born children, from their personality to their appearance to their various skill sets. So that's the world we live in. We have a lot of choice. We also have a lot of information. It is estimated by IBM that there are 2.5 quintillion bits of information generated every single day. It is estimated that we, as walking human data machines, generate the equivalent of 6 newspapers of data every single day. And if you were to look at the amount of information that we, working individuals in developed societies, consume consciously, subconsciously, stuff that's just coming at us through our cell phones or ads, any kind of media, news, all that information apparently is the equivalent of reading 174 papers, and I haven't even begun to count how many times we check our cell phone, our emails, etc. Suffice it to say, we live in a world today where we have a lot of choice and we have a lot of information. Well, what are the consequences of offering people all this choice and all this information? I first got interested in this question in the 1990s. And at that time, I didn't realize that we were about to hit a pivot, that there was actually a turning point about to happen, and that we were actually going to have a further explosion of choice. I was just a PhD student at Stanford University, and I happened to stumble upon this grocery store. It was called Draeger's, and it was one of these really unique grocery stores that, was upscale and offered people lots and lots of variety. Now, at that time, it was unique. Today, it's kind of normal. So they had 250 different kinds of fruits, of mustards, vinegars, mayonnaises, over 100 different types of olive oil, over 500 different types of fruits and vegetables. And I loved going to this store. It was like going to an amusement park. But then one day I asked myself, how come I never buy anything? And after a series of discussions with the store manager, we decided to do a little experiment, which has since come to be called the famous jam study, and I'm going to tell you the truth about that study. So, the jam aisle at Draeger's had about 348 different kinds of jam. And we picked the Queen of England's jam, Wilkin & Sons, to do our little experiment. And so here's what we did. We set up a tasting booth right near the entrance of the store, where we either put out 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And now we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to stop and sample some jam? And you could try as many as you wanted. Second, in which case were you more likely to buy a jar of jam? Now, it turns out that more people stopped when there were 24 on display than when there were 6. 60% versus 40%. Now, for all of you nerds in the room, the numbers accidentally add up to 100%. They're actually different populations. Now, of the people that stopped, when there were 24, only 3% of them actually bought a jar of jam. Whereas of the people who stopped when there were 6 jams on display, 30% of them bought a jar of jam. So, people were more attracted to the larger display, but when it came down to making a choice, they were more likely to make a choice when they saw less than when they saw more. So why are we less likely to make a choice when we see more than when we see less? So we all know that our grandmothers used to tell us that our eyes are too big for our stomachs. Well, our eyes are too big for our minds as well. we might actually enjoy gazing at these aisles filled with mustards, vinegars, jams, but we can't actually do the math of comparing and contrasting and picking from that stunning display. We want more choice because more choices means greater opportunities to find that perfect match. But the more choices there are, the harder it gets. In fact, since the jam study was conducted, there have now been hundreds of studies that have been done by, not just me, by lots of different scientists across many different domains that have looked at the consequences of offering people more and more choice. And choices from consumer choices to very difficult choices like investment choices, medical choices, career choices, life and death choices. It turns out that there are three consequences of offering people more and more choice. First, the more choices people have, the less likely they are to make a choice. In essence, they choose not to choose. Second, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to make an error, exhibit inconsistent preferences. Third, the more choices they have, the less satisfied they are with that which they've chosen because they keep wondering, oh, maybe I should have tried the other one instead. Now, why is this? In 1956, the great psychologist George Miller came out with a seminal paper, which is still true today and has been continued to be verified by more recent MRI studies. The seminal paper was called 7, the magical number 7 plus or minus 2. And in that paper, he documented some basic limitations of our brains. If I ask you to rank order from best to worst, a whole bunch of things on how much you like them, beyond about 7 plus or minus 2, you just get confused and you can't keep track of what you liked and what you didn't like. Relatedly, if I give you some information, words, numbers, pictures, and I don't give you an opportunity to memorize that information, then beyond about 7 plus or minus 2, that information starts to crumble away. Now, what is a choice but a bundle of information? What are you doing when you make a choice but comparing bundles upon bundles of information? So the more choices we have, the more cognitively complex it gets for our brains to deal with. So I got another question for you. This is a hard one. So I don't have any nail polish on right now. Which one of these two colors of nail polish do you think would look good with my dress? So if you think I should wear the one on the left, clap your hands. Okay. That's pretty good. If you think I should wear the one on the right, clap your hands. Wow, okay. People like the one on the right a little more than the one on the left. Well, so a few years ago, so since I'm blind, right, I didn't know what to choose. So a few years ago, I was in a manicure salon and I asked these two ladies to help me choose. After all, the color of my nails should matter, right? People are going to judge something about me by what color I put on my nails. So this one lady says to me, well, you should definitely pick ballet slippers. And so I ask her, well, what does ballet slippers look like? And she says, well, it's a very sheer pink. It'll look really elegant on you. So then this other lady chimes in. She goes, well, I think you should go for a doorball. And so I ask her, well, what does a doorball look like? And she says, well, it's a light pink. It'll look glamorous on you. Okay, so you understand I'm choosing between sheer versus light, elegant versus glamorous. Okay, so I'm trying to get these two ladies to explain to me how these two nail polishes are different from one another. And about the only thing they would agree on is that if I could see it, I would know the difference. So I wondered about that. So I took those two bottles of nail polish and I took the labels off the nail polish and I brought them into the laboratory and I invited a bunch of women into the laboratory and I asked them, which one would you choose? Well, first of all, 50% of the women accused me of playing a trick on them, that it was the same color in 2 different bottles. Of the other 50%, more people chose a Dorobal. Then I put the labels back on and I invited a bunch of other women in and I asked them, which one would you choose? And when they saw the labels, more people chose ballet slippers. So I'm guessing that a rose by another name would actually smell different. So here's my point, though. Maybe there's a difference between these 2 colors. And maybe it might matter in some rare circumstance, but for the most part, we can't actually tell them apart. That whatever difference exists is not very meaningful. And yet, most of us wouldn't be caught alive doing eeny, meeny, miny, mo. That or just toss a coin. And why is that? And that is because in today's choosing world, no matter what I'm choosing, from nail polish to what I eat, to what I wear, to whom I'm married, to what career I undertake, to how I die, no matter what it is, each choice I make, from the trivial to the consequential, I am no longer asking the question, what is my need? What function does this choice serve? Whenever I make a choice, no matter what the choice is, I'm asking myself some very complex questions. What I'm asking myself is, who am I? And given who I am, what should I choose? And if I choose this or that, is that sending you the right message about who I am and what I stand for? Now, having this opportunity to express our individuality and distinguish ourselves from other people can be really empowering, but it's also rather overwhelming. And the reason is because although we think of choosing as an act of individuation, we don't actually choose alone. And by this I mean that every act of choice is an act of communication. Like body language, it's generated by you, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. And every time I make a choice, I'm sending a message to you. And the message that I most often want to send to you is, hey, I'm unique, but I'm not an outcast. I'm understandable. Yes, I am not a member of the majority, but I'm also not a member of a glaring and lonely minority. So we as choice providers, when we're trying to decide what choices to give people, we have a lot to consider as to how we give people choices, how we present them their choices. Because every time people are making a choice, they're asking themselves these major existential questions about their identity. And yet they can't actually often tell the choices apart, nor do they have the cognitive awareness or ability to always figure that out. And you know what? We're actually not that different from each other either. We're not actually that unique. So how do you give people that kind of choice to enable them to choose without them feeling overwhelmed, but also enables them to feel like they found something that was a good fit? I'm going to give you a few very easy to use techniques that have been used across a variety of industries, and you can adapt them to your own industry. The first, that's the most intuitive, is you want to cut. Get rid of all irrelevant, redundant options. In the old days, people would fight me on this, but increasingly retailers have been discovering that if you cut options, reduce options, you increase sales, lower costs, and overall increases revenues. Now, it turns out that whenever the golden rule on the street is the 80-20 rule, that roughly speaking, 80% of your sales comes from about 20% of the options. And so then the question becomes, which ones do you cut? How do you cut? And one of the things that I work a lot with retailers on is the way of figuring out how to strategically cut. Because let me tell you something, if your employees can't tell the choices apart, can't differentiate them, then your customers won't be able to either, and they'll walk away. So you want to strategically cut. Now, obviously, you really wouldn't survive as a store, at least most retailers won't survive, if you only offer 7 plus or minus 2 choices. So how do you give people more choice without making it harder and harder for them to choose? So the second technique is categorization. And the best way to describe to you some of the basic principles of categorization is to just show you a study. So this was a study done with a large grocery store chain that had a magazine aisle that looked identical across all its stores, meaning that the thing that housed the magazines was the same. However, the number of magazines that it had in its display varied from store to store. So they offered anywhere from 331 different magazines to 664 different magazines. And so that if they offered fewer magazines, they would double, triple, quadruple, slot it in the various slots of the magazine aisle. Now, it turns out that if you ask customers, how many choices do you have? They get it wrong. Their estimates of how many choices in the aisle as compared to how many choices were actually there was less than 0.1 correlation. So they're not actually standing there and counting. But what does drive people's perception of variety? And it turns out that the categories can make a really big difference. So let's imagine that I show you 400 magazines and I divide that up into 20 categories. So that's option 1. Or I show you 600 magazines and I divide that up into 10 categories. Which one do you think people are more likely to find more user-friendly and buy from? The 400 with the 20. So if you agree with that one, clap your hands so I get a sense of what your vote is. Okay. And what about 600 with 10? Okay. So that turns out to be 400 with 20. And I'll tell you why. Because I can handle more categories than I can choices. When I see a category, the only question I have to answer is yes or no. Is this of interest to me? So I can just say no, 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 and feel really good about dumping out all these options. I feel really efficient and productive. And then I get to a category that's relevant, and as long as you make the number of choices in that category manageable, we're golden. And so the key really is to use more categories, but make the number of choices per category manageable. Now, we know that people can handle at least up to 25 categories. Beyond that, it might actually get too much. The third one is condition for complexity. How do you enable your customers to really benefit from customization? We want customized products, right? We want that perfect dress. We want that perfect car. We want that perfect piece of furniture, etc. And it turns out, though, that if I were to sit you down in a room and I make you choice after choice after choice after choice after choice for a whole hour straight, at the end of that hour, you will be depleted. In fact, they even find that there's a lowering of your immune system. It's that taxing. Now, of course, we don't want to lower people's immune system when they're just trying to buy something cool, right? So how are we going to make it so that it's more manageable? So we did a study with a car company in Europe, and what had happened was that the customers had already picked their car, and now they get to custom make it. So they have to make about 60 different decisions about the engine, the interior decor, the steering wheel, the exterior car color, you name it, about 60 different decisions. And the number of choices per decision varied. So engines would have 2, exterior car color, you might have 56 different choices. So here's what we did. Half the customers got to see the decisions going from high choice, meaning you start off by making the decision of which one of these 56 different car colors you want. And then gradually it gets easier and easier, 21 different interior decor, easier, 2 engines would be the last decision. The other way was low choice. You start by choosing amongst the engines, then gradually it gets harder, all the way up to 56 different car colors. Now notice how the information is the same. The only thing I have done here is varied the order in which the information is presented. What happens? Well, the first thing we looked at was your likelihood to hit the default button, right? I don't know what interior decor. I'll just go with the default. I don't know which rear view mirror. I'll just go with the default. Okay? Well, obviously, if you keep hitting the default over and over again, what's the point of customization? So it turns out that people that were in the high to low choosing situation would start off with quite a lot of energy around the choosing, but then would lose steam and start hitting that default button. The people that went from low to high choice, they hung in there. When you look at how satisfied they were after they bought their car, that too, high to low, less satisfied than the people that were from low to high. So this is just some things to keep in mind as to how to make that choosing experience for your choosers better and easier for them to manage. Remember that a chooser needs to feel competent and confident during that choosing exercise. Now, there's a lot of talk around technology. And how can technology help us become better choosers? And clearly it can. We've created so much choice and information that we now need to create technologies to actually deal with all this stuff that we've created. So how can technology help us become better choosers? Now, if you think of what we as humans do at our most basic level when we're making choices, we're doing 2 things. We are pickers and finders, and we have imagination. We have this ability to imagine something and somehow pair choice and imagination together and create it. Stories, structures, ideas, principles. We're really good at that. Well, can these technologies that we have created that we're afraid of, they might actually undermine our ability to be human, they might take away our value as human beings. Can these technologies actually improve our ability to choose? And I think that's the most relevant question, as opposed to whether these technologies are undermining our ability to be human beings. It turns out that if you pay close attention to AI and machine learning, they can help us become better pickers and finders, and they've already started to do that. We cannot keep track of all the information we have. We regularly go to technologies to help us out with that. And as long as we know what we're looking for, we know the criteria, then AI and machine learning will absolutely make us more efficient and more accurate. Where it will fail us is when we have implicit assumptions that we're not even aware of. That's when it can hurt us. Now, what about the Holy Grail called imagination? And I know you're going to be hearing about this somewhat in the afternoon. Can AI and machine learning influence imagination? Is it even capable of doing this thing called imagination? Take a look at this painting. Who do you think made this, a human or a non-human? If you say human, clap your hands. Non-human. Okay. What about this one? Human? Okay, non-human? Okay, you guys seem pretty split, by the way. Okay. Do you like them? Yeah? Okay, maybe some of you kind of like them. Okay. By the way, they're both made by non-humans. And as you'll see this afternoon from Hod, who's one of my colleagues, he has a robot that actually makes paintings that haven't been created by humans. Now, what happens when you show people paintings, either made by humans or non-humans? Well, first of all, they can't tell them apart. Second of all, they're just as likely to like it if it was made by a human and a non-human. So they can't tell them apart. By the way, they're convinced they can tell them apart. So they're just as likely to like it, but when they're told who made it, then they're less likely to think that it's art, God forbid. They're less likely to think it's skillful, and they're less likely to believe that it should be expensive. Well, we might continue. I'll let the philosophers debate about whether this is art or not. But I guess the point I want to leave you with, and to conclude, is the idea that we have, as human beings, long figured out how to become more efficient and better as being pickers and finders. And that's been one of our greatest, most powerful resources as human beings. And we now have technologies that can make us do that even better. But I want to suggest to you that going forward, the real power of choice might actually come from our ability to expand on our capacity to imagine. And that technologies can be useful in helping us expand on that capacity. As the great French polymath Henri Poincaré once said, invention consists of avoiding the constructing of useless combinations, and consists of the constructing of useful combinations which are in infinite minority. To invent is to discern, is to choose. So allow me to propose to you a corollary, which is to choose is to invent. That the real power of choice will come from our ability, our enhanced ability to construct those most meaningful options which have the power to transform our lives as individuals as well as the world around us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheena.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Iyengar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sheena, you were beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 2 questions for you, and we would be delighted if you could answer them for us.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you this one first. So an anonymous person in the audience says, you are absolutely right that we are making choices every minute about what to wear, what to eat. And this must be the reason why Mark Zuckerberg wears only gray T-shirts in order to avoid choosing.
Yes.
Some choices are easy, some choices are hard. How do we deal with every morning on how to prioritize choice and just how to avoid some?
So I have a very simple rule about that one. So here's my heuristic, which you're welcome to steal. Be choosy about choosing. Okay? And I really mean it. Most decisions I do not make. I'm happily delegating them out to other people. If it's a choice I need to make, it better be something really important to me, because otherwise it takes energy. So be choosy about choosing.
Thank you. And this is by far like the most favorite question. It's been liked so many times, and we've been visiting it like this morning as well. Can you explain America's choice of Donald Trump?
Oh, Jesus.
Question.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to that one. We'd probably need to have a whole day to discuss that one. But I'll just point out a couple of factoids. How many candidates was Trump competing against for the Republican nomination? Anyone remember? Huh? It was a lot more than 5 and a lot more than 8. It was more than 12. It was about 15. How many of those do you remember? Not too many. So what do you notice about when you have a lot of choice? What becomes the most salient criteria? It's no longer about quality, it's about whatever stands out, whether it's for good reason or a bad reason.
Wow.
By the way, the same thing happens for dating.
Which is the perfect explanation of why I am single. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of inviting on stage Ms. Dias to kindly present a token of gratitude to Ms. Iyengar. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheena Iyengar. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheena Iyengar.